Japan up close.
I think that Japan really remains a leader in many fields. Certainly, semiconductor making equipment, all of the materials and chemicals for semiconductors, the whole sort of autos and auto parts ecosystem. Japan remains a global leader. And even we're seeing it kind of move forward in things like hydrogen cars and things like that. So it may end up being a leader in those areas too. But I think one of the problems is that Japan is very good at incremental technological innovation, especially in manufacturing. But the problem is that Korea and Taiwan and China have become very good at this kind of innovation. And actually, they are now able to produce many of the products Japan was competitive in at lower costs. So Japan has not been able to make that leap from sort of incremental technological innovation to a more sort of what we might call radical innovation or discontinuous innovation or invention. And certainly this is a problem in software for them. So I do think that many of their manufacturing companies are beginning to struggle in competing on price in global markets. I do think that being behind on software does not position Japan well for many, sort of software dominant industries in the future. So I hope that they can stay leaders in these areas. Certainly Toyota is beginning to move more on EVs than they did before. And they are obviously a global leader on hybrids. And so hopefully they can find leadership in new areas as the economy evolves. I do think that Kishida's idea of stakeholder capitalism is similar in many ways to my concept of communitarian capitalism. I think he's focusing very dominantly on reducing inequality by raising wages and things like that. In my concept, I include other things such as a lifetime employment, seniority-based wages, enterprise unions. I look at things called Yoko Narabi Kyoso, which is a sort of risk-sharing minimal competition in which firms all kind of jump into the same product area so that no one sticks out and is taking too much risk. I include the keiretsu groups and things like that. And I really think this kind of capitalism worked really well in the catch-up stage. But I do not think it has worked well since Japan caught up with the West in major industries by the 1980s. Now, don't get me wrong. This type of communitarianism, capitalism, or stakeholder capitalism, as Kishida calls it, is very helpful to stabilize society. But I do think we need to acknowledge, and Japan needs to acknowledge, that this is hurting technological innovation. It is hurting intensive efforts to encourage startups. It makes it virtually impossible for companies to reinvent themselves. So this system does hurt, in my mind, economic growth and profits. So in other words, sort of doing everything in a quasi sort of egalitarian way across the board, rather than focusing on merit, favors average behavior and average results over excellent behavior and excellent results. It prioritizes effort, that is input, over performance and output. So it prioritizes the status quo over rapid and discontinuous technological change. So I do not think this is a good direction for Japan to go. And I think this is sort of a classic economist kind of response. And I'm not really an economist, although I know a lot about economics. I think it would be better for Japan to really focus on economic growth so wages can increase, I think people need to be given incentives to innovate, to invent, to create startups, to figure out, new kinds of organizational forms and strategies. Then the government should tax the profits and redistribute it to lower income people. Now, I know, this is what we say we do in the United States, and we don't do it well. So I'm not saying it's a perfect system. But I think that not allowing, that kind of dynamism in the economy is assuring Japan a continued road of stagnation. Certainly government money helps. There's no question about that. And I agree with the Japanese government's talking about and actually starting to give more money to some of these areas. But money is not enough. You need a lot of other things. You need human resources with ideas, people who are willing to take risks. You need a society that allows entrepreneurs to fail and have a second or third or fourth chance. You need a society that makes it more acceptable for entrepreneurs to become really rich through quick capital gains. You need diverse talent. Japan needs to attract more foreign software engineers and other professionals. Money can solve some of this, but it's actually very difficult, if not impossible, to pay a foreigner a sort of market rate salary and fit them into a Japanese company's lifetime employment and seniority wage system. So also Japanese businesses have this tendency towards yoko narabi kyoso, this idea that, let's act together so none of us sort of stick out. And if we fail, we all fail together. This is exactly what Japanese semiconductor makers did. They all kind of went into memories. And so when the market changed and Korea took over memories, they really weren't advanced in other areas. And what worries me is we see this sort of risk-sharing behavior just in the last year or 6 months. There's a new semiconductor firm. Japan is getting back into making their hoping semiconductors. It's called Rapidas. It was created last year with support from 8 sort of major companies, many of them electronics companies. The same risk-sharing effort occurred when they created Elpida Memories, which went bankrupt and was bought by Micron in 2013. Even just the last week or so, Toshiba situation, they've announced a sort of solution to Toshiba's problems. And even that is sort of some Japanese companies with interest in electronics getting together. So I guess what I'm trying to say is firms need to be competitive, to decide on a strategy and then make a structure to implement that strategy. This is, Alfred Chandler from decades ago kind of idea. The problem is in Japan, often they create a risk-sharing structure. And out of that, slowly, some sort of vague compromise strategy starts to evolve. And so this type of behavior is a roadblock to creating a new wave of innovation leadership for Japan. So yes, there are many issues beyond funding. I think we also need to realize China is pouring money into all of these fields, more money than any other country. And so I think Japan, like many other countries, should decide on focusing its limited resources on a few of these fields where they think they might be the most competitive. This might be biotech, pharmaceuticals, robotics, and the like. So I also think this government money should be used strategically to get the behavior of the Japanese government wants. So change behavior in desirable ways. For example, money should be used to basically pressure Japanese large companies to buy from Japanese startups. We have this kind of law in the United States. Japan needs that. We also the Japanese government could use this money to basically strongly encourage large Japanese companies to have more open innovation with startups and actually with other large foreign companies. So history sort of suggests that industrial policy, at least history thus far, that it's been very helpful in the catch-up stage, that it is not as helpful, certainly not tinkering with specific firms, is not successful in the go-ahead stage. Okay, so it works when the product can be kind of easily and legally reverse engineered and the target is clear. I think that as Japan moves forward and the government gives this money to get more bang for their buck, they should focus it. I think they should make sure that they're getting the kind of behavior out of firms that they want. And I think it should be focused on basic research, not any sort of tinkering with specific firms, because that's where you get, in all societies, you get corruption and a lot of waste. No, I don't think so. I think it is a wonderful ideal. I think if we could get everyone in the world to sign on to it, I think what it is an idea of we should have an acceptable financial return, not an excessive one, but also balance that with some sort of social return, if you will. But I don't think it works in a world where many actors, including the whole sort of US capitalist system, and I'm not defending it, by the way, I'm not saying that's good, but our whole system, and increasingly more in the world, capitalist systems are really very much driven by financial returns. And so, that's what I said sort of somewhat earlier, that maybe it's best to let these financial returns happen and then tax them very heavily and use that money to put into sort of the social things that you need to have happen. Again, it doesn't work perfectly, but stopping technological innovation and, stunting labor mobility and a lot of things that lead to economic growth and technological innovation, to me, is just asking for problems over the long term. So, well, I think it's important to remember that the US also had some major lost decades. The 70s, the 80s, and into the mid-90s were actually very difficult times for the US economy. And I'm old enough to remember Japan was surpassing us, obviously, in many areas, and we were not doing very well. But the US allows the winds of creative destruction to blow through our economy. This is the economist originally from Austria, ended up at Harvard in the 1940s, Joseph Schumpeter. This is his idea that technological change and economic growth require allowing new technology, new ideas, new organizational forms to blow through an economy and destroy obsolete companies, organizations, practices, and bring in new ideas, okay, and new companies. Japan, in contrast, prefers stability and predictability. And with lifetime employment, and I know it's really changed quite a bit, and there's irregular employment and all that kind of stuff, but employment is still quite secure in Japan. They really can't afford to have this big wave of bankruptcies going through. And so they do not allow the winds of creative destruction to blow through Japanese, at least the big business sector, very strongly. Obviously, we've had some bankruptcies, but many of the big companies of my childhood are long gone. So the biggest thing, and the one I want to focus on, but I will say some other things related to it, is that Japan needs more competition, both among companies and among individuals. While lifetime employment and seniority wages are really admirable and really beautiful in terms of keeping a stable society, in the world today of rapid and discontinuous technological change, they are hurting productivity, profits, and wages. So allowing more competition, it's going to lead to successes and it's going to lead to failures, rather than just sort of let's just go along with the status quo. The failures can be worked on. I'm not advocating an American style thing, but in Europe, for example, they can fire people, but people have a good social safety net under themselves for a year or two while they find a new job. And there's no doubt that competition will cause a lot of pain. Competition gives advantages to smarter, healthier, and more hardworking people that produce results. But I would say that the current situation, where employment is quite secure and seniority is still quite emphasized, means that companies are just stuck with lots of workers they don't really need. They can't bring in new experts mid-career to actually change the company. So I think, and I was just in Japan recently, I find people telling me this is really demotivating. It demotivates them and makes for a stagnant economy. So I think that people need incentives to retrain themselves, to learn new skills, to try new things, to move to different parts of the country if they want to, or different parts of the world, or change companies mid-career if they want to. I think Japanese people should be able to negotiate their salaries when they start a new job. This is something that never happens. Now, obviously, increasing competition also includes allowing foreigners into Japan, because Japan has a severe labor shortage, and especially in sort of professional areas like software development. And I think many talented professionals would love to live in Japan. It is a wonderful place to live. They would love to contribute to Japan's success, but they need to be attracted with market-based wages. They need to be welcomed, and they need to be allowed to stay for life if that's what they really want to do. Now, software engineers, finance experts, Japan has changed quite a bit recently. They can get permanent residency really quite quickly. But I think this needs to be expanded to be a much broader core of professional people, certainly doctors, nurses, other healthcare workers, even child care workers. So this immigration, I know it's been a big thing for a long time. I've talked about it a jillion times. But I think Japan is actually getting to the point where they may actually have to start doing something more serious about this, more than really what Abe did. Because people are getting overworked. I interviewed with many people. And the new thing is, because Abe put some restrictions on overtime, the new thing is that overtime only counts at the end of the workday. So apparently what's happening is people are getting on the train at 6 a.m. and getting in early before the workday starts. And I just don't think, and I talked with a lot of young people and older people that are trying to manage these younger people. younger Japanese don't have the ethics, the work ethic. I mean, they have a great work ethic, don't get me wrong, but it's not the same as people 30 or 40 years ago. So I think that, Japan is going to have to deal with this overtime problem. And of course, right before our very eyes are all of these talented, well-educated Japanese women. And, they actually understand the Japanese language and Japanese culture. So they would be obviously a very important resource, I think, to tap. I think this would require changing some sort, social norms, if you will, that really we cannot. It's the same that what happened in the United States. You cannot change women's opportunities without changing the expectations of men. And as long as Japanese salarymen need to work really late, they, I feel sorry for them. They can't really contribute to housework or childcare or parental care, even if they want to. So, but here again is some very talented people that would be easy to bring into the labor system. And finally, I think you alluded to it earlier, is Japan needs to find some way to have more startups. These are startups create jobs. They can provide some creative destruction and certainly economic growth. I've been looking at this over the last 8 years or so, and there are more startups than there were before. Certainly around Tokyo University, I think we're seeing some successes, but still in 2021, Japan's venture capital investment was about 1% that of the United States. And of course, we are kind of an outlier, but it was 34% that of South Korea and 20% that of Germany. Whereas my memory is about 10 years ago, or 8 years ago, when I started looking at some of this, Germany and South Korea and Japan and France were all around the same level. So I am worried that Japanese are falling behind on this startup issue. And there's various things they need to change. And actually, Kishida's administration is talking about different tax changes and the like. But really, in some ways, a fundamental problem is there's too few young Japanese. The best and brightest often want to go to the stability of a large firm and have lifetime employment. Tokyo University people, they can afford to fail. So, that's why I think we see they have the social network and probably the money behind them from their parents for the most part. But Japan has few young people, few that are willing to work in startups. And so I think in talking to a lot of people, there's just too few ideas that are coming out. It doesn't mean the Japanese don't have good ideas, but you need a large number of people that are working on those ideas. So here, again, I think that immigrants could help. And I think Japan is making it much easier for immigrants to come in and start companies, but I think they need to do better at that. So I guess in short, I think obviously there are many things, Japan. I mean, we could get into fiscal sustainability issues, the macroeconomic, and a lot of things that Japan needs to do to help their economy and get out of the lost decades. But if I had one thing to say, I would say that Japan needs a lot more competition. And that doesn't mean the sort of American crazy, chaotic, really kind of horrible in some ways, the way we cut people off with no time or anything. I think there could be a much gentler way. I think Germany has a more gentle way, for example, than we have in the United States. So I'm not saying at all that Japan should introduce competition to the extreme like we have it in the United States. but not really having competition, it sort of assures that Japan will remain a relatively stagnant economy.
Japan Up Close.